So that is just, I know, information overload. You can look back at those and reflect on those at your leisure. In our remaining time, I'd like to take you through kind of putting it all together in a few different examples. So the long-term goal here that we're going to look at is social skills. The present level is that Freddie is comfortable around peers in parallel play, but he does not initiate socially with his peers. That's the present level. And that is probably obtained through interview and observation. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn to initiate and reciprocate social interactions with peers in order to establish and maintain friendships, right? There's that in order to language that makes the long-term goal better. The short-term objective towards that long-term goal is Freddie will name all classmates, and there's 25 of them, in pictures with 100% accuracy in under 1 minute over 3 consecutive probe dates by December 1st, 2016. So you see it, this good quality short-term objective. It is smart, it is highly specific, it is quantified, there's a deadline, and this is a particularly good example because it includes the fluency element that I've mentioned a number of times. This is making sure that the student can do it accurately and quickly, that he's able to go through the deck of peers in under 60 seconds. The strategies for teaching this are daily one-to-one DTT, which means basically sitting down with him, presenting the antecedent. All right, we're going to name all your friends. Ready, set, go. And they go for a minute, and any that are, then there's an error made on them. Then they practice those in isolation, and then they go for another minute, and any that where there's an error, they practice those in isolation. Then they might go for another minute and work their way up until he's being accurate and fast. So those are the strategies. The only thing that's missing from the strategies, it's not explicitly stated, but is kind of implicit in the DTT, which is a discrete trial one-on-one instruction, is that there is reinforcement provided for his successful responding, right? If you don't have reinforcement, where do you go? Go home. How do you evaluate this? All that you need to say is data, not anecdote, data. So here's the data sheet. We list all 25 peers' names in whatever order makes sense on this data sheet. You don't teach them all at once necessarily. You might start with 5 and then add the next 5 and then add the next 5. That would be part of what you agree to in terms of your tactics and strategies. So we're able to see when each peer is introduced, when it was mastered, and generalization probe means we pull out another picture of them, or we take the student into the classroom and say, who's this? So that he can generalize from the picture to another picture or from the picture to the student. Right? We really want to avoid circumstances where you train and hope. Right? We taught with the pictures from the school photo album, and we hope that he'll generalize to other pictures of real life. Never trust and train and hope. Probe it. Now here's the data we collected. So what you'll notice here is this was all taught in November and acquired in November. So again, you're seeing this isn't a goal that takes a year to teach. If this takes a year to teach, it tells you you're either not teaching it enough or you're not teaching it well enough, because it shouldn't take a year to teach. Once he's achieved these goals, then the next question is, what's the next evolution? Where do we go with this? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So here you'll see that in the first day of data, he had 18 correct. So they were teaching the whole stack, it appears, not just leveling up, although that would be an option available to you. And he made 3 mistakes. The next day, he improved to 19, and he dropped to 2 errors, and then 21 and 3 errors. And then you can see he gets 22, 25, 25, 25. And so he very quickly gets through all of the peers in a minute, but he's making mistakes, but you see the mistakes start dropping over here to the point where he only made 1 mistake. You can easily take that data, click a button in Microsoft Excel, and boom, you have a data sheet. We're able to see that he had that upward trend with naming his peers, and he achieved 100% of the expectation. And you see his errors here, and most importantly, in the most recent data, you see the errors are dropping down towards 0, the corrects and incorrects, right? So you've got a master target list that tells you everything you're going to be teaching. So at the end, when you go, oh, cool, he learned 25 peer names. What are those names? I can go and I can show you those names because that's part of our data. It's part of our accountability. Here's the data on his acquisition of those. And here's the graph of that data. And then you ask, well, he achieved this, right? This was achieved in November. By Christmas, you've achieved 100% accuracy with naming peers and pictures. You've achieved fluency with low or no errors. Then the question becomes, where do you go from here? What's next? What's the next evolution? It's great that he knows his peer names. What are you going to do with those peer names? And that becomes the next short-term objective. And once you achieve that, you move on to the next short-term objective. So ideally, in his social domain, he's leveling up through these short-term objectives. He's building more social sophistication, more robust repertoire within the school year, not just this one thing in the school year. Here's another example putting it all together. This is the communication domain. So present level is that Freddie has a difficult time following instructions and usually requires SEAs to prompt him. That's really speaking to the present level of his receptive vocabulary, receptive understanding. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn the expressive and receptive language to function independently in school. The short-term objective to reach that is that Freddie will learn to independently follow specific single-step instructions, and it says refer to target list, from teachers 100% of the time by February 1st, 2017. The strategies are teaching 3 concurrent sets of 3. So that means working on 3 goals at a time simultaneously, 5 times daily opportunities from the teacher and the EA, prompting and prompt fading, praise and token reinforcement. So earlier when I talked about what are the basic elements of strategies, you present the antecedent, you help the student with prompts, you fade those prompts, and you reinforce. You see all of those elements in this list of strategies. It's lean and mean. What's the evaluation of this? No opinions necessary, no anecdotes. Here's the data sheet. And so this is a fictional list of targets here. Some of these things like look at me, I wouldn't actually teach as a target. But here's where you would plug in your specific receptive one-step instructions, right? One-step instruction, teacher says something that has one element to it, and the student responds to it. The teacher can help generate these targets, the parent, the education assistant, others can help generate what the targets are. And, oh, I'm missing, oh, I don't have the data for that one, sorry. So all you would see here, there's no graph that goes along with this one, but you would be able to see this can be sufficient data, that it was introduced and mastered, and by a certain date, you'll see that you've achieved X number of single-step receptive instructions, and then you ask the question, what's the next evolution? Where do we go from here? Here's an independence or self-determination goal area. The present level is the student has age-appropriate hygiene skills, with the exception of brushing his teeth. He can tolerate the brush in his mouth for 20 to 30 seconds, and if you ask any dentist, they want that brush in there for 120 seconds, 2 minutes. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn self-care skills in order to be an independent and hygienic teenager, because those are nice teenagers to be around. The short-term objective to reach the long-term objective is that Freddie will learn to independently brush his teeth for 2 minutes each day after lunch by December 1st, 2017. So independently implies 100%. Context is after lunch. What will he do? Keep the toothbrush in his mouth for 120 seconds by December 1st. The strategies are daily instruction with the education assistant. When? After lunch. We're going to shape duration with a timer, which means he has to brush until the timer goes off. And once he's achieved that, we extend the length of the timer. We're going to use prompting and prompt fading, and he's going to earn bonus tokens on his token system. So you see those fundamental elements of tactics and strategies are clearly articulated there. They're lean and mean. And here's the data. So you see from October 1st through 18th, every school day after lunch, you can see the weekends are missing there. He started at 20 seconds, and then we went up to 25 seconds, and then we went to 30. And if you're wondering, well, how did you decide when to move in these 5-second increments? We had a rating, a subjective rating of his level of cooperation or uncomfortableness with this activity. So 1 is major resistance, he didn't want to do this. 2 is some minor resistance, but easily promptable. And 3 was cooperation. So the first time we did 25 seconds, there was some minor resistance, but then we did it again and he had no resistance. He was totally cooperative. He was totally cooperative the next time. And after 2 episodes of cooperation, we upped it to 30 seconds. Now he's never been asked to keep that brush in there for 30 seconds before. He can see the timer and know that we upped the ante. And so we saw major resistance that first time. But then the next day, at 30 seconds, he had minor resistance. And then the next 2 days, he had no resistance. He learned to tolerate it. So we upped it to 35 seconds. And the first time, he had some minor resistance, but now he's figuring out what's going on. This isn't unreasonable. We're reasonable people. The next several days he had no resistance, and so you could see we were able to start ramping up the time faster and faster, and he was more cooperative because he learned to trust, okay, when the timer goes off, I can stop this, and it's not actually that bad. And this was the data thus far. So we were able to see this is the duration in seconds, and when we finally got up to 2 minutes, we stopped doing it. And eventually then he went on to high school, and he stopped brushing his teeth in high school because nobody brushes their teeth in high school. But the long-term impact for him is he fought his parents tooth and nail to brush his teeth at home. And it impacted his oral hygiene, of course. It impacted his breath, which impacted his social opportunities. And so those were all reasons to teach it at school. You could say, well, this is the parents' problem. Mom and dad need to teach this at home. But in this case, the school was totally willing to dedicate no more than 2 minutes a day in a bathroom that they identified. And the proof is in the pudding. The child learned the skill, right? It made his life better. Here's a behavioral objective. Present level is that Freddie runs from the classroom several times per day in order to use the bathroom. It's good that he's using the bathroom, but he's taking off, and usually at his grade level, you have to ask permission. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn to vocally ask for items and activities in order to meet the teacher and school expectations, not just operate on his own agenda. Short-term objective, Freddie will learn to vocally ask his teachers to use the restroom by saying "bathroom, please" 100% of the time on a daily basis. And so the context is when he needs to use the bathroom. The behavior is "bathroom, please." There's the criteria. The only thing missing here is the deadline. Strategies are verbal pre-corrects from the SEA each hour, which means at the top of every hour, the EA would just lean over and remind him, remember, if you want to use the bathroom, you can say "bathroom, please," and then the EA would back away. It was just a reminder. Review of a contingency map in the morning, after recess, and after lunch. And a contingency map was just a visual support that showed him, if you ask, you get to go and do what you want to do. But if you don't ask, you're going to have to come back and ask. Response blocking and redirecting, meaning if he actually did leave without permission, they would stop him and have him come back and redirect him to ask. And those were some prompts, and those prompts were faded. And the reinforcer was actually getting to go to the bathroom, so they didn't have to add a reinforcer here. And here's the data. And you can see the number of appropriate requests slowly went up, and it hovered around 3 or 4 because, again, you don't use the bathroom more than 3 or 4 times per day. Even that might be a little bit high. And so he's doing more of the prosocial desired behavior, and he's doing less of the problematic behavior, which is just taking off when he feels like it. He's now asking for permission. Click of a button in Excel, and we make a graph, and you can see the right thing is going up and the wrong thing is going down, or the right thing is going down, right? Both are moving in the desired direction. And we don't need to ask for any anecdotes at the IEP meeting. You just look at the graph and go, good job, everybody. Here's an academic short-term package. So the present level is that Freddie has met DIBELS oral reading fluency. So DIBELS is a screening tool. Oral reading fluency means how many words you read per minute. So he's met the benchmarks for the end of grade 5. That tells us his oral reading fluency is proficient to the end of grade 5, beginning of grade 6. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn to read and understand in order to access information in academic settings, read for leisure, and obtain employment in the future. So this is a very high level or ambitious long-term goal. People are anticipating that Freddie is a student who may be able to go to post-secondary studies, which is why it says access information in academic settings and also reading for leisure and at work. The short-term objective is that Freddie will read at least 120 words per minute with fewer than 4 errors per minute. He will pass the grade 6 DIBELS benchmarks by June 1st, 2017. So here, I'm contradicting what I said earlier where you don't have an annual goal. But this is appropriate because we want him to gain 1 year of reading in 1 year at school. And so we're going to assess this at the end of the year, which is a summative measure that summarizes, but we're not going to wait till the end of the year. We're going to be constantly counting his words per minute all the way through the year. And by the end of the year, he should be able to hit 120 words per minute with the grade 6 material, grade 6 content. So the strategies are daily one-to-one instruction, because that's what's recommended from the National Reading Panel, of at least 20 minutes. That includes pre-reads, folding in, and repeated readings, which are all evidence-based practices in literacy instruction. And the evaluation is that he will have those screening assessments done in September, January, and June so that we can assess in September and January that he's on track to meet his target in June, as well as the daily oral reading fluency to see how he's doing every day and tracking his errors every day. And so here's an example of what that looks like. across a couple weeks in September. We can list the books that he's reading. For him, it was important to know whether it was fiction or nonfiction because he had certain preferences. You can see that his oral reading fluency, the number of words correct per minute, is going up. You can see that his error rate was unacceptably high, 6, 8, but then is coming down. We can graph that. We can identify that, oh, the 2 days where he had the lowest words correct per minute and the most errors were days when he read nonfiction, and we know that he likes fiction. And so that his error rates are really reflective of his preferences in this case as well. He struggles more with those things. He's not interested in those things. It helps us understand, right? The data lets us understand what's going on. Here's another one, academic. Freddie has completed the Math UC Alpha program, equivalent to grade 2 outcomes. That's his present level. You can assess that through record review by looking at the math data. The long-term goal is that Freddie will learn basic functional math skills in order to manage money and make purchases in the future. The short-term objective is that Freddie will complete the Math UC level beta, the next level in the program, to lesson 18, with a possible 34 lessons, by June 1st, 2017. The strategies to achieve this math outcome are daily one-to-one math instruction in Math UC level beta, that's the MUSB, with his SEA, so his SEA is his numeracy teacher, using adapted instructions, and the EA knows what those are, prompting and prompt fading, and token reinforcement. Again, those fundamental core elements of effective instruction. The evaluation will be using a Math UC datasheet, the daily lesson summary data. And I just want to explain this because this is also a good example of the repetition that's required, right? Repetition, repetition, repetition is often really important for our students in particular, even though it tends to be good for everybody. So what you'll see here is we don't let him progress in his math program until he's reached competency. And we will repeat as necessary until we achieve competency, and only then will we move on. So repetition is built in. So lesson 1 was taught on September 7th. He had 76%. And so we repeated lesson 1 on September 8th, and he got 86%. We repeated that again on the next day, September 9th, and he got 93%. After he was over 90%, we allowed him to move on to lesson number 2. And on September 11th, he had 86%. We did it again the next day, and with only 2 repetition, or a second repetition, he achieved 98%. So we moved on to lesson 3. He got lesson 3 with 92% the first time, so we don't need to repeat this. So we move on to lesson 4. Lesson 4, he started low at 67%. Whoops. We repeated it. He got 73%. Then he got up to 90%. Now we can move on to lesson 5. And so here's an example of where the data informs database decision making and the repetition for mastery, and we bake in the repetition because we know the repetition is critical to have in order to achieve competency before moving on. This is math. This is linear. You can't move on to more sophisticated things if you don't have a solid foundation in these fundamentals. And so the program is set up to foster his success and to not put him in a position where he's unlikely to tackle content effectively because he's lacking the prerequisites. And there's some data on the trials to mastery for each lesson. So you can see it took him 3 trials to get the lesson, and then 2 trials, and then 1 trial, and then lesson 4, it was harder again. And we can have this picture across all of the lessons, okay? So that was a bunch of illustrative examples. I know it's a ton of information. Again, I want to repeat it, not to beat the dead horse, so to speak, but this is the ideal, and I understand that in most places the ideal isn't happening. What we want to start doing is making things a little bit better in terms of everything we've been doing, and in particular the data is something we can do. We just need to have the motivation to go forward doing it, and I would really encourage you to think about the recommendations that I had in terms of keep it simple, keep it small, make it meaningful, and that's how you open the door and you start to get institutional behavior change, staff behavior change, to take the data that is required for IEPs but has historically not been collected for IEPs. Now we're 5 minutes away from the end of the day. Thanks for hanging in there. I know it's Friday afternoon and I've dumped a lot on you. The last thing I want to point out in your handout is this evaluation checklist for IEPs. I think this is a great idea just for self-reflection, to walk away after you've had all this information as a bit of a checklist to remember at your next IEP, am I starting to do these things? So goals reflect areas of need for the student. Well, that's kind of taken care of. Transition plans and goals, when applicable, that will only sometimes be applicable. The goals are broken down into objectives and steps. The objectives identify a skill, a context, and a time frame, some of those elements that I talked about. The objectives are written in terms of observable student learning of actions, verbs, things that the student will do. Data is measurable and can be easily collected for the purpose of progress monitoring. That's critical, the wording there, easily collected, because I know the biggest headache that many of you in the audience are thinking of right now is, how do I get data? It's not that easy. So start small and keep the response effort low. Don't try to change everything overnight, or you'll wind up with that experience I had where the special ed director said, we're going to do this year for everybody, and we totally didn't do it because we aimed too high. So you can check out the rest of this. Here's another checklist here. Parental concerns are included. Goals to improve social skills, communication skills, right, to make sure you've got those long-term goal areas identified. This is just a good idea to make sure that you start doing some of these things. And the last thing I'll share is how to make this happen. We need contingencies that require data. We really don't have them in the sense of audits. And we need to train people how to do it. And that usually requires more than just a single Pro-D day on how to do data collection. Really now falls to the special education teachers to think about some data for your students and get your education assistants maybe to get on board taking that data. And then the contingencies to maintain it, well, in the absence of audits that require people to have it, you have to make it meaningful. If you don't use the data in a meaningful way, you can't blame people for not collecting the data. Real change here requires systems level change, like at a provincial policy level. Right now, I know you guys are here because you're motivated. I'm preaching to the choir, people who want to improve IEPs. I appreciate that. So we're not going to make systems level change. You're going to make child by child IEP level change, maybe school by school change. But that's a way to move forward. So